Fritz by Satyajit Ray. Fritz, after having stayed at Jayanto for a whole minute, I could not help asking him, "Are you well? You seem to be in low spirits today." Jayanto quickly lost his slightly preoccupied air and gave me a boyish smile and said, "No, on the contrary, I am feeling a lot better. This place is truly wonderful." "You've been here before. Didn't you know how good it was?" "I had nearly forgotten," Jayanto sighed. "Now, some of my memories are coming back slowly. The bungalow certainly appears unchanged. I can even recognize some of the old furniture, such as these cane chairs and tables." The bearer came in with tea and biscuits on a tray. I poured. "When did you come here last?" 31 years ago. I was 6 then. We were sitting in the garden of the circuit house in Bundi. We had arrived only that morning. Jayanto and I were old friends. We had gone to the same school and college. He now worked in the editorial division of a newspaper and I taught in a school. Although we had different kind of jobs, it had not made any difference to our friendship. We had been planning a trip to Rajasthan for quite some time. The main difficulty lay in both of us being able to get away together. That had, at last, been made possible. Most people go to Jaipur, Udaipur or Chittor when they go to Rajasthan, but Jayanto kept talking about going to Bundi. I had no objection for having read Tagore's poems, The Fort of Bundi. I was certainly familiar with the name of the place and felt a pleasurable excitement at the prospect of actually seeing the fort. Not many people came to Bundi, but that did not mean that there was not much to see there. It could be that, from the point of view of a historian, Udaipur, Jodhpur, and Chittor had a lot more to offer, but simply as beautiful place, Bundi was perfect. However, Jayanto's insistence on Bundi did puzzle me somewhat. I learned the reason on train when we were coming down. Jayanto's father, Animesh Das Gupta, ADG, like the AMG of Mercedes, ADG, Animesh Das Gupta, had worked in the archaeological department. Animesh, archaeological. Animesh, archaeological. Try to remember it this way. Create links so you do not forget things. His work sometimes took him to historical places and Jayanto had, as a child, come to Bundi. He had always wanted to return after growing up just to see how much the modern Bundi compared to the image he had in his mind. The circuit house was really rather splendid. Built during the time of the British, it must have been at least 100 years old. It was a single-storied building with a sloping tilted roof. The rooms had high ceilings and the skylights had long dangling ropes which could be pulled to open and shut them. The veranda faced the east. Right opposite, it was a huge garden with a large number of roses in full bloom. Behind these were a lot of trees which obviously housed a vast section of local birds. Parrots could be seen everywhere and peacocks could be heard, but only outside the compound. We had already been on a sightseeing tour of the town. The famous fort of Bundi was placed amidst the hills. We had seen it from a distance that day but decided to go back to take a closer look. The only reminders of modern times were the electric poles. Otherwise, it seemed as though we were back in the old Rajputana. The streets were cobbled. The houses had balconies jutting out from the first floor. The carvings done on these and the wooden doors here bore evidence of the work of the master craftsman. It was difficult to believe we were living in the age of machines. I noticed Jayanto had turned rather quiet after arriving in Bundi. Perhaps some of his memories had returned. It is easy enough to feel a little depressed when visiting a place one may have seen as a child. Besides, Jayanto was certainly more emotional than most people. Everyone knew that. He put his cup down on the table and said, "You know, Shankar, it is really quite strange. The first time I came here, I used to sit cross legged on these chairs. It seemed as though I was sitting on a throne. Now, the chairs seem both small in size and very ordinary. The drawing room here used to seem absolutely enormous. If I hadn't returned, those memories would have remained stuck in my head forever." I said, "Yes, that's perfectly natural. As a child, one is small in size, so everything else seems large. One grows bigger with age, but the size of all the other things remains the same, doesn't it?" We went for a stroll in the garden after tea. Jayanto suddenly stopped walking and said, "Deodar." I stared at him. "A deodar tree. It ought to be here somewhere," he said, and began striding towards the far end of the compound. Why did he suddenly think of a deodar tree? A few seconds later, I heard his voice exclaiming jubilantly, "Yes, it's here, exactly where it was before." I mean, of course, it's where it was before, I said. Would a tree go roaming about? Jayanto shook his head impatiently. "No, that is not what I meant. All I meant was that the tree is where I thought it might be." "But why did you suddenly think of a tree?" Jayanto stared at the trunk of the tree, frowning. Then he shook his head slowly and said, "I can't remember that now. Something had brought me here near the tree. I had done something here." "A European." "European?" "No, I can't recall anything at all. My memory is a strange business." They had a good cook in the circuit house. Later in the evening, while we sat at the oval dining table having dinner, Jayanto said the cook they had in those days was called Dilavar. He had a scar on his left cheek and his eyes were always red, but he was an excellent cook. Jayanto's memory began returning one by one soon after the dinner when we went back up to the drawing room. He could recall where his father used to sit and smoke a cheroot, where his mother used to knit, and what magazines lay on the table. And slowly, in his bits and pieces, he recalled the whole business about his doll. It was not the usual kind of doll little girls play with. One of Jayanto's uncle had brought it for him from Switzerland, a 12-inch long figure of an old man dressed in a traditional Swiss style. Apparently, it was very lifelike. Although it was not mechanized, it was possible to bend and twist its limbs. Its face had a smile on it, and on its head it wore a Swiss cap with a little yellow feather sticking out from it. Its clothes, especially in their little details, were perfect bell button, pockets, collars, socks. There were even little buckles on the shoes. His uncle had returned from Europe shortly before Jayanto left for Bundi with his parents. The little old man had been bought in a village in Switzerland. The man sold him had jokingly said to Jayanto's uncle, "He is called Fritz. You must call him by his name. He won't respond to any other." Jayanto said, "I had a lot of toys when I was small. My parents gave me practically everything I wanted, perhaps because I was the only child. But once I had Fritz, I forgot all my other toys. I played only with him. A time came when I began to spend hours just talking to him. Our conversation had to be one-sided, of course, but Fritz had such a funny smile on his lips and such a look in his eyes that it seemed to me as though he could understand every word. Sometimes I wondered if he would actually converse with me, if I could speak to him in German. Now it seems like a childish fantasy, but at that time the whole thing was very real to me. My parents did warn me not to overdo things, but I listened to no one. I had not yet been put in school, so I had a